Hi, welcome to Culture Shot. So I've got a bit of a provocative question for you this week, and like most provocative questions, it's a relatively simple one until you try and answer it, and then it becomes multi-level, multi-layered, quite complex, and hopefully it'll give you plenty of food for thought for the week ahead. The question is your organization at its heart, fundamentally, at its deepest level, is it a learning organization? See, most organizations are pretty good at training. If you're big enough, you've probably got a training department or a learning and development team, people who are responsible for finding courses, putting together programs, etc., to fill in the gaps that the organization might have from time to time. And I'm sure you're quite good at that. Being a learning organization, on the other hand, is something quite different. It inverts the thinking. It requires that you assume that the organization is the university. The organization is the place that you go to learn, and that what you're seeking is the knowledge that exists within the heads of the people who are already there. That knowledge comes from their experience, comes from their backgrounds, comes from their education, comes from their current life choices. It comes from a whole range of different things. And if your organization gets quite big, it becomes incredibly rich. But it doesn't really have to be a big one. It could be an organization of 10 people and have a great deal of richness. But the bigger it gets, arguably, the richer it becomes. But arguably, of course, the more complex it becomes to find out what you already know. So there's a couple of things that you need in order to be good at this. The first one is you need the will. Philosophically, you need to believe that people are good, that people have good ideas, that people have good intentions, that people are worthwhile listening to, that people are smart, that you've hired smart people, and that if you just sit back and listen to them, they might actually be able to tell you some things which would be helpful. And that's, I suppose, if you're watching Culture Shot, you possibly are representative of an organization like that. But it's not everybody, of course. It's going to be much more complex for organizations that don't have that philosophy to move forward on something like this. And ultimately, I think those organizations will be forever diminished because of their lack of ability to learn from what they already know. So let's assume you've already got that. That's number one. Number two is you need to have a mechanism. This is where it often falls down. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, I think the road to poor engagement is often paved with bad mechanisms, actually, because you can have the best intentions in the entire world and use all of the good words, all of the good vernacular, all of these wonderful phrases of our people are our greatest asset and we value our people, and do all of that kind of stuff, and then stuff it up right at the end by actually doing a very poor job of executing on all of that. A lot of the time what it comes down to is, I think, we try to make things very complicated when they can be very simple. We get locked into using all sorts of scientific interrogation tools, all sorts of ways of polling the organization and running surveys and trying to find out what it already knows, when actually you're probably better off just having a sit down and gab session. And so I think that sometimes the simplest tools, and by the way, the free simple tools, are often way better than things you can spend a hell of a lot of money on that are complex and scientific. And so here was a fun thing for me this week. The reason that this suddenly is on my mind once again is that I learned from an organization that I've been working with that they began to implement something like this week, and it's actually, or in the last couple of weeks, and it's actually started to work very, very well for them. And what it was that they implemented was something that I learned from another South African organization, one called Ovations Group, when I was initially researching how to build a happy sandpit. They told me about this thing that they did, which was called an espresso session every second Thursday, where the CEO and the CFO would sit down with randomly selected employees, and they'd have what they called just conversations. So they didn't have, there wasn't any structure to them. People couldn't prepare for them. They didn't want people to get into a kind of a corporate paradigm. It wasn't an opportunity to talk about work. They didn't expect that at all. What they did was they'd put like a word on the table, something like tradition, for example, because you've got to start somewhere. And they'd talk about that for a while, and bit by bit, as they got deeper and deeper into it, smart people, when they get to talking, will start to talk about other things, and the conversation will meander. And they began to get to the point where they found that they would get 5 things out of every espresso session, which could meaningfully impact the organization, even though that was never an intention, even though it was never an outcome that they specifically sought. It just turned out that way because as they began to listen to their people and learn what they already knew, they began to realize that there was all sorts of ideas, all sorts of things that they were missing out on. And so that kind of a simple mechanism, I think, is a really wonderful thing. It's an enriching thing. It's definitely an engaging thing. And I think if you were to think about something like that, if you were to think, first of all, about what can we learn from the organization that we've already got? What can we learn from inside the heads of the people who are here, the smart people that we've hired? And then how do we go about digging into that and actually accessing that information? You'll probably find you'll have one of the coolest adventures that you can have as a people leader. I mean, I really mean that. You could have an absolute, South African word, you could have an absolute joy pulling that all together and learning what it is that you already know, and deeply, deeply enrich the organization in the process. So I think that's something that you should consider. It's been food for thought for me all week since I learned about this organization that was actually had started to implement something similar and was also getting great results. It's been been food for thought for me. I hope it's food for thought for you as well, and I wish you a very successful week.